Good morning. Our reading this morning is from Numbers chapter 12. And if you've got a church Bible near you, it's on page 148 in the church Bible. Numbers chapter 12, Miriam and Aaron oppose Moses. Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. "Has the Lord spoken only through Moses?" they asked. "Hasn't he also spoken through us?" And the Lord heard this. Now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. At once the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, "Come out to the tent of meeting, all three of you." So the three of them came out. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance to the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. When both of them stepped forward, he said, "Listen to my words. When a prophet of the Lord is among you, I reveal myself to him in visions. I speak to him in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" The anger of the Lord burned against them, and he left them. When the cloud lifted from above the tent, there stood Miriam, leprous like snow. Aaron turned towards her and saw that she had leprosy, and he said to Moses, "Please, my Lord, do not hold against us the sin we have so foolishly committed. Do not let her be like a stillborn infant coming from its mother's womb with its flesh half eaten away." So Moses cried out to the Lord, "O God, please heal her." The Lord replied to Moses, "If her father had spat in her face, would she not have been in disgrace for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back." So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on until she was brought back. After that, the people left Hazeroth and encamped in the desert of Paran. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you very much to my wife for reading for us. Can I just add to the notice about Shearwater, the point of the picture, and that was in the notices that came round, there is a website, and they'd very much like us, anybody who's got access to the internet, of course, to please put some comments in support of this project. So they're trying to get some support from the Surrey Council to actually carry out the work. So if you please can go on there and have a look at it, it will be really good. So the first family falls out then. So Psalm 133 verse 1 says, "How good and pleasant it is when God's people dwell together in unity." Good relationships, as you know, are vital, but sometimes there are problems. Here's a cautionary tale. 4 ministers met for mutual support. They developed a very close relationship. So one day they decided to share their greatest weaknesses with one another in order that perhaps they could get help from one of the others. The first one said, I have a weakness for gambling. The second said, I'm getting overly partial to whiskey. The third said, I've been experimenting with drugs. The fourth remained silent for a moment. So the others said, what about you? Sorry, guys, my problem is I'm a gossip. I need to make a phone call. What comes from the lips can be the deadliest of all. And of course, what comes from the lips never comes back. James chapter 3, verse 6 says, the tongue is a fire, a world of evil, so be careful what we say. So we've been in John's Gospel for a long time, so we need to get in the TARDIS now and go back about 1,500 more years to Israel's wandering in the wilderness. So the idea of the first family fallout is not new to us, is it? So we have our own the first family there is Miriam, Aaron and Moses, but we have our first family in our country falling out, which is very sad. So at the beginning then, I thought, since this is the start of a brief short series, and although we've been in it earlier, I thought a quick recap of things you will know well, hopefully. I thought I would do a quick recap. So if I can have the next picture, please. Thank you very much. So when was, facts about Moses. When was Moses born? Well, there are various dates given if you look it up on the internet, but about 1570 BC. Where was he born? He was born in Egypt. And what was significant about him? I've just put up there that he led Israel out of Egypt, but also he was the conduit for getting the Ten Commandments, you'll remember as well. Now, who was he? Well, he's descended from Levi. This may be the bit you don't know so well. We'll come to that back in a minute. Levi was one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And why do we care about this all these years later? Well, you'll know 2 Timothy 3:16 possibly. All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction and instruction in righteousness, that the servant of God may be complete, that thoroughly equipped for every good work. So let's have a look at the next one then, Phil, please. So here's the genealogy of Moses. And so there you are. You see Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Levi was one of the 12 sons. And then the parents of Moses were Amram and Jochebed, who was a very godly woman, apparently. And there is children mentioned as well. So another one then, Phil, please. So here's the map, really. And so Hazeroth, I've put in green down the bottom there. So that was the location when they were well into this journey in Sinai. And it was there that Miriam and Aaron challenged Moses. So today we have a tale of 2 spiritual journeys, really. One of Moses, which started badly and then got better. And one with Miriam and Aaron, who started reasonably well, then messed up significantly. So the first section I've called Maturing Moses. Moses' life experience and development is crucial to today's story. I wonder if you're ever asked to do something that you felt ill-equipped for. Don't need to worry about the picture at the moment. I'll come to that in a moment. Were you ever asked to do something you felt equipped for? That happened to a lot of people in the Bible. Jeremiah felt too young to be a prophet, but God provided. Gideon felt too weak to be a deliverer, but God provided. So God doesn't call the qualified, God qualifies the called. So if you're called to something, God will provide what you need. But Moses, however, thought he was well equipped and he acted rashly. He was a unique person because he was a Hebrew who had been brought up in the court of Egypt. But he identified with his people's plight and thought he was a deliverer. He was headstrong and bold. He reminds me of Muhammad Ali, for those of you old enough to remember that great boxer. And his stock phrase was, "I am the greatest." You remember that. Reputedly, one day, he refused to fasten his seatbelt when he was getting on an aeroplane, to which he said, he was challenged by the air hostess, and he said, "Superman don't need no seatbelt." So the air hostess said, "Superman don't need no airplane." So God had not yet called Moses, and yet he was up and at him. So it was a disaster. He killed Egypt and was seen doing so. He killed one of the Egyptians and was seen doing so, and he had to flee to Midian. So now the picture. So you can see the flight that he did. You can see where Midian is, and he passed through the Sinai region that later he'll be going through. And this was the turning point of his life. So years and years in Midian had an amazing effect on him. So his problem was that he wanted to do God's work, and he would indeed in due course do God's work, but he wanted to do it with his own plan, with his own timing, and with his own strength. But if you want to be God's man or God's woman, you have to look for God's plan. So God's plan for Moses was coming in 40 years' time. But Moses' time in Midian would lead to transformation. And we know about his family because I've shown you that already. He must have felt very sad having to flee and be a nobody in the middle of Midian. Robert Browning said this, "I walked a mile with pleasure. She chattered all the way, but left me none the wiser for all she had to say. I walked a mile with sorrow, and ne'er a word said she, but oh, the things I learned from her when sorrow walked with me." So what happened to Moses in Midian was the key to his transformation. And what happened? Absolutely nothing. Nothing today, nothing tomorrow, nothing year in, nothing year out for 40 years, other than looking after his father-in-law's sheep. During that time, his pride and his self-importance melted away. He learnt there to care for sheep. Later, he would care for God's people. He learnt to live in a wilderness area. Later, he would guide God's people through that wilderness area in Sinai. So desert is a place of purification, of getting over hindrances in our lives and getting transformation. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us if Moses had any particular experience before this of God, but by the time he was called, he was ready. So Moses came to Mount Horeb, and that's also known as Sinai, where later he would receive the 10 Commandments. And you remember how he was confronted by the angel and how he eventually made lots of excuses, but eventually he'd already been humbled. He was ready to go with God's plan. God said, "Now's the time, this is my plan, you will go to Pharaoh," and that's exactly what he did. Somebody said of Moses, he spent 40 years thinking he was somebody. He spent the next 40 years learning he was a nobody, and then finally 40 years finding that God is everything. So I'd like to ask then, is there anything, I wonder, in your lives and in mine that might be hindering God's purposes at this moment? And do we look to him to equip us for the job that he has given us, or do we sometimes try to go alone? So I'm not ready for the picture yet, Phil, but number 2 then. So we talked about Moses, now murmuring Miriam. So the team was a great team. Aaron and Miriam were older than Moses, and they'd been involved with him beforehand, and Miriam had looked on when Moses had been put in the bulrushes. Moses was a prophetess and helped lead the Jewish women in praise and thanksgiving. And Aaron was the older brother and helped Moses, and also he was to become the first high priest. But Moses was the one called to be leader. So we all have different gifts, and they all had different gifts, and all had very valuable gifts. And without everybody's individual gifts, we can't function. So that not everybody can just be the leader. For a long time, it seems that that Aaron and Miriam were happy to be supporting caste, but something went wrong. What could possibly go wrong with it? Well, it was a green-eyed monster of envy, as Shakespeare called it in the play Othello. Proverbs 14:30 says, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." And someone else said, "It's not in the character of many people to honor without envy another friend who has prospered." How sad. And someone else said, "Never underestimate the capacity of envy to destroy." So Miriam was envious of Moses' position, despite the fact she had a perfectly good role in everything as well. So she was disciplined, as we've heard, by the Lord. So she complained first about Moses' new wife. Apparently Zipporah must have died. Some of the commentators think it was a racist thing and that the lady who he married was actually a black person. Others disagree with that. But whatever that was, it was a red herring from the main point. They started with that, but the main point is, does not the Lord speak through us as well as you, Moses? So that was the thing. So in the next picture then, Phil, please. So there we are. So I was wondering, why did they come to that? And you may have your own idea of what it was, but I thought maybe Miriam had an eye for being the top dog when she was singing the song of Miriam and Moses, you find in Exodus 15, which have some very stirring words there. So maybe that was the turning point. She had a time of being in the limelight, perhaps. But you maybe have other ideas. If so, tell me afterwards. So as we've seen now, Moses was a very humble man, and he didn't even defend himself. I wonder how we would have coped if somebody challenges you after the service. I wonder how I will cope. Help. So God stepped in, made it clear that Moses was the leader. And for Miriam, that was very serious. So God disciplined Miriam. And leprosy was a horrendous thing, because leprosy is a living death. You're excommunicated from everybody else, and you lose, your nerves get damaged, you damage your limbs, and you get horrendous injuries. And it's a terrible way. So no wonder Aaron jumped up and begged Moses to intercede with God to get her restored. So murmuring and complaining is a serious business, and it's especially a serious business when we complain about God's chosen leaders. Joyce Meyer said, "Complaining is dangerous business. It can damage or even destroy your relationship with God and also with others." Someone else said this, I like this, a bit flippant perhaps. "When life gives you lemons, make lemonade and sell it to all those who get thirsty from complaining." So what would you say is God's plan for your life right now? Do you ever envy someone else's gifting? This story encourages not to do so. Your own contribution is valuable and unique. The only thing that you can be good at is being uniquely you as God created you with the individual gifts that He's given you. No one else can do that like you can. And even the Apostle Peter was concerned about John. "What about this man?" he said. And Jesus said, "What is that to you? You just follow me." So what are the main messages? I wonder what the main messages you've got out. So the last one, Phil, please. So the first one, I think, is to respect our leaders. It's very important that we hold them in high esteem. We're to respect, we're to support and encourage our leaders. It says in Hebrews 13:17, "Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, for they keep watch over you as those who give an account Do this so that their work will be a joy and not a burden. Our church leaders have had a call and an anointing from God. And remember, even David in the Old Testament, already anointed to be the future king, would not do anything against Saul because he knew that Saul was also the Lord's anointed. The second thing, beware envy. So the green-eyed monster. So someone said, if you wish to travel fast and far, travel light. Get rid of envy. Get rid of unforgiveness. Get rid of selfishness. And get rid of fears. Better concentrate on the gifts that you have. And the third thing, grow in humility. So humility is something, it's not having a demeaning position about ourselves, not groveling, not despising spirit, but having a right estimate of ourselves, realizing our own weaknesses and our own failures as well. And we grow in humility as we draw closer to God, and we recognize his love and mercy and grace towards us with our failings, which should help us to show love, mercy and grace to others in their failings. But out of it, I thought, to me, perhaps at the end, the big message was, live the faith-filled life. And one of my colleagues will spot a typo there. Tell me about it afterwards. So, live the life of faith. I think Moses was a phenomenal example for living the life of faith. So somehow, many people today seem to be admired for being puffed up. There's a verse in the Bible, in Habakkuk 2 verse 4, says this, she is puffed up, see, he is puffed up, his desires are not right, but the righteous will live by his faith. And that righteous live by his faith was taken up by Paul in Romans. Habakkuk was referring to Babylon there, but Aaron and Miriam were puffed up, unfortunately. And puffed up people live by human wisdom, by human resources, and have no faith. So living by faith starts from awareness of God's greatness. And Moses had seen God's greatness in spades. He'd been rescued the people from Egypt. He crossed the Red Sea. And they had that song which they sang with Miriam. Who among the gods is like you, O Lord? Who is like you? Exodus 15:11. Majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, and working wonders. So Moses is a great example of living the life of faith. He had an encounter with God, believed him at his word, and followed him. He stepped out to fulfill God's plan in the end. He was always aware of God's presence. He was always aware of seeking God's will, not his own. And he was always trying to act in God's power. And when Miriam challenged him, he didn't have to defend himself. He just left it to God. So this starts also at the very beginning of this in awareness of God. Now, I was reading a book whilst on holiday a few weeks ago by John Comer, Practicing the Way. And John Comer says we shouldn't be aiming to be good Christians, which is having intellectual faith in Jesus. What we should be really is apprentices of Jesus. That's what we should really be, apprentices. An apprentice walks with Jesus day by day. And in doing that, we have to be with Jesus, and then we become like Jesus, and then finally we do what Jesus did. So it starts with being with Jesus. And this guy, this book, said something which I latched onto, and it may be helpful to you. So we can try and be with Jesus in our quiet times, and hopefully we all do a quiet time. But he was encouraging us to try and be with Jesus at other times in the day. Now, we always often are doing things which require undivided attention, so we've got to be focusing on that then. But we have quiet moments. You can think of quiet moments when you're maybe stuck in traffic or whatever. Quieter moments when your mind may go to something else. And it may go to family, it may go to friends, it may go to the Olympics at the moment. But why not let it go towards God and focus on him? Try and bring to mind something, maybe a verse of scripture that you love. Bring it to mind during the day, and that will help you draw closer to God. So there we have it then. Those are my messages. I don't know if you've got any messages you drew out of it. If you have, tell me afterwards. So I thought we'd close by just having a moment's quiet and just ask God to show you anything. He might have something completely different to tell you other than I've been talking about. But what out of this, what's the message for you? What's the takeaway for you from this story this morning? So let's just have a moment's quiet while you think about that.